Marya Zelli, with her husband Stefan jailed for theft, now has to find a way to survive on her own. She meets the Heidlers, who render her their aid, but things very quickly spiral out of control as she has an affair with the husband, HJ, and one which was shockingly orchestrated by his own wife, Lois. Quartet by Jean Rhys is her debut novel, initially published under the title Postures, which outlines the plot of ex-chorus girl Marya, her haphazard existence, and the consequential degradation of, as a result of her adaptations to survive in Parisian society at the time, along with the other women in the novel, with these adaptations referring to their femininity. The novel outlines the women's suffering and losses in their attempts to mitigate them through their femininity, a depiction of the tragedy of being a woman in French society of the era. As the title suggests, Quartet is comprised of four main characters: Marya Zelli, the main protagonist who we follow along in the story, her husband Stefan Zelli, who gets jailed for theft, and the Heidlers, HJ, who gets into an affair with Marya, and Lois, who supported their affair. When you think of femininity, you tend to think of the idea of softness, of gentleness, of a kind of innocence. This is Marya, in her meekness. She is someone who has got no harm in her, someone who lives a though delightful, haphazard existence as she goes about her business, never questioning or truly challenging her situation. She never questioned what Stefan's job was despite being married for so long, and we are never explicitly told what it was, or what he did to end up in prison either, only briefly stating that it was for theft and for us to make our own assumptions. The dresses she sold Madame Hochchamp were described as for clients qui font la noce, impractical and fantastical. Everyone around her is also often described as hard, more brutish than she is, like how strong Lois was, or tall, gaunt, with a protective expression was the Sola. But Lois too has this side of her, having an odd habit of wincing when Heidler spoke to her simply, speaking to Heidler in a caressing voice, and doing nothing when Heidler pushed her away while arguing with the mistress, Marya. And of course, her feigned indifference to the affair. Marya was the meek lamb who, if she was happy and petted, she would become charming. As it is the same weakness that is to be criticized is to be cherished, her softness and femininity that helps her to survive. And Lois, though to a lesser extent, still employs the same tactics to aid her. Yet despite their efforts, Marya remains alone in the dark room with an atmosphere of departed and ephemeral loves that hung about the bedroom like stale scent, while Lois had to suffer through invisibly, to put on carpet slippers and come listen at the door, to allow their affair as her means to end it. Feminine roles are another aspect that come to mind when discussing femininity. Certain archetypes which are the product of the aforementioned feminine qualities. Marya is the young girl turned mistress, while Lois is the wife. This dynamic lets us understand and eventually sympathize with them. Marya is pitied upon by Lois and Stefan as well as the readers just as much as they loathe her. given Marya's suffering in the ordeal by Lois's orchestration, and even before that, being nothing more than a chorus girl who married not so wealthy. At the same time, we also hate Marya for being a mistress and pity Lois for having ought not to make nuisances of herself, to grin and bear it, just to end her husband's affair. Furthermore, their individual roles, which inherently are at odds, only inflicts further suffering, with Lois hosting parties to rally bystanders against Marya while acting unfazed to assert her position, while Marya can only be there, and has to be there, as nothing more than a mistress for Lois to endure upon. The women suffer from the femininity they pride as, and is supposed to be a strength, the power of love. But that strength still brings destruction to themselves. And this brings us to the men in the novel, who are presented usually out of frame like support characters to emphasize on the femininity of the women and their struggles, through their immorality akin to natural forces and obstacles that challenge the women and force them to react. Stefan drives the plot for Marya's gradual demise, while Hitler is merely a player in Lois's game, with the scenes of their affair focused primarily on Marya's conflict between morals and her love of Hitler, as well as the relationship between Lois and Marya. Both Stefan's and Hitler's immorality are not criticized in the novel, where Stefan's theft was only avoided by the journalist who helped Marya, and Madame Hochschaum's slight discomfort, not liking to be mixed up in these things, though even that could be argued to have stemmed from a more underlying racism against all these people, all the strange couples who filled her hotel, internationalists. Hitler, on the other hand, was completely unscathed in his affair, with all the fault placed on Marya, and had caused Lois to play her game in the first place. For the man, the male, the important person, the only person who matters. Additionally, the unnamed man from Tonkin also further deteriorates Marya's status from a mistress to somewhat of a prostitute, and ironically was previously cheated on by his own mistress and devastated, but now perpetuating the cycle onto Marya and Hitler. Stefan at the end of the novel also repeats this as he allows Mademoiselle Chardon to leave with him and who comforts him, yet calling her a grue and finding women loathsome, horrible, soft, and disgusting weights, dragging men downwards. Femininity is defined through Quartet by the women and the roles that they take on, with the men in the story acting as catalysts for its expression. In essence, femininity is akin to an adaptation, a defense mechanism or a reflex in response to the harsh society they are put into. It allows the women to survive and cope, but never thrive, to suffer losses regardless in one way or another. Although some like Lois ultimately uses it to her advantage to aid her in finding a solution. But others like Marya simply indulges in this little strength of hers, but never using it to better her situation, only worsening as paralleled by her consumption of alcohol and drugs in increasing strength over time, from white wine to brandy to Barbitol, which has become insufficient, and ultimately no, a Pernod, she insisted. As how insignificant, coherent, and understandable it all became after a glass of wine on an empty stomach, to live on illusions of permanence and security from the overestimation of the will of their femininity alone.